In de studio heeft Claus een gesprek met Dr. Edmund Toliver over de opera Die Meistersinger, waarin Toliver een rol zingt.
Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Edmund Toliver. My calling name is Edmund Toliver. My full name is Zalotis Edmund Toliver. I'm originally from the United States. I've been in Europe now for the last 20 years, singing opera here, and currently live in Germany, and have been now in Holland actually for the last 2 years, singing on a relatively regular basis here opera, and am very happy to be here today with you.
But why opera? I mean, you're black in American society. It's belong more to the things like hip hop or jazz, something like jazz. But opera, it is more really Spanish or
very European, you might
European,
say.
I mean, yes.
This it is, but you have to look at it this way: that you know that. Also, being a black person, that the history of singing is very much a part of all black peoples, and in my family, very especially my family, all sing. In fact, I have my father as my greatest role model, who was a singer, and he just recently died this past year, in fact. But really up until the end of his life, singing was a very, very important part of his life. It was perhaps his influence which showed me the way into music as such. Both of my grandfathers were known singers, and all of whom respected the European music. You know, the form of music that is really stemming back to the time of the spiritual in the United States, when those were the old folk songs which were sung out on the fields. They were influenced by the Western influence, that is the Western European music, particularly in their harmonies. This then grew further, which then really worked itself into jazz, which is really pretty much an amalgamation, a combination of the types of music. And in fact, what the European musicians were about, particularly toward the end of the 19th century, was that they were trying to become as free actually as what jazz did become in the 20th century. So I see that as sort of like a relationship that classical music was trying to move toward this freedom, which really ultimately has expressed itself in jazz. Why then and therefore cannot a black man sort of take part in the production of classical music as such?
Okay, but about my question, why jazz?
Why classical music?
Yes.
Well, because I grew up with it. We had a very, very good music program in our school systems, particularly when there used to be enough money for school programs. It's not just a problem for Europe here that there is not enough music not enough money for the arts, but also we had. In my childhood, there was a lot of money for that, and it was a part of the everyday curriculum. And I grew up playing the French horn, and I thought really for the longest time I would become a member of an orchestra before even before thinking about singing as a professional career.
Okay, but do you like also other kinds of music, I mean music from black society?
Sure,
like hip-hop,
sure.
Yeah?
Well, you're Brazilian, and one of my favorite music is Brazilian music. And I'm a big fan of Ivan Lins, and of course the Bossa Nova era, and all of these things which came from Latin America, particularly starting in the 60s. Jazz I'm a great fan of as well. I, in fact, sing spirituals. I sing a lot of the the show tunes and jazz ballads myself. Mm-hmm. I'm not as facile to do, say, things like scat, which are the really fast-moving things which a lot of jazz singers do, but I try to think that it has not just the sound of an opera singer, by the way, when I do this music as well.
So you live here in Europe 20 years, sure?
That's right.
And so are you come here in Europe because of opera, or?
I did actually the entirety of my studies in the United States. at predominantly at two universities. At the Illinois Wesleyan University, where I did my my first studies in music education. I became a teacher first, but directly then on completion there, I was accepted at the University of Michigan, and then started my master's and then doctoral studies as a performer.
Okay, but can you compare? Sorry, can you compare for instance, in opera in America and Europe? Is there
the people ask me all the time, because I've had a relatively successful career here. In as much that if one doesn't want to call it successful, at least I'm still working. Mm-hmm. I've been now a singer of opera for 28 years, and the biggest difference are the distances. I mean, Europe is a lot more compact. Mm-hmm. For instance, now I live in Dortmund, and that's about 2.5 hours away from here in Germany. And so, in fact, I just returned this morning via train, although I was just there for a day, so I can see my family. And so that makes it really very, very nice. It's oftentimes that is a classical singer, and I have a great deal of respect for my colleagues that whom I knew with growing and who I've met over the years when I still go back to the United States, who get in their cars at the end of August and come back in June. That's it's nothing for family life, I don't think.
Okay, and what about your performance? Is more between Richard Wagner, something like that?
Well, you mean in terms of the composers?
Yeah, compose. Yes.
It's mostly the heavier literature. I have a pretty heavy voice, and in fact, it's channeled itself. You know, sometimes we have our intentions to do more, but I do a great deal of Wagner, which is kind of a phenomena in and of itself, because it's considered to be not just some of the heaviest opera around, but has a very strong German identity to it. In fact, my first opera, which I sang, was Wagner opera, was in Graz, in Austria, and that is considered to be a place where it may not necessarily be welcome to see a black person doing this type of thing.
Yeah, that's I mean. But why Wagner? So I mean, in Dutch is so you get the power. It's very strong. It's things happen about Hitler times because. So gets we are nationalists. We have a nationalist feeling, and so he was very strong with some advice. And it's
you have to realize. Let's go back to the time of Wagner. I mean, a lot of things have happened since Wagner was alive, and he's then, of course, died. And then they came what happened in the last century, particularly in Germany, but which affected us all in the world. Germany was not organized at the time that Wagner was writing his music. He was amongst those people who was desiring for this type of thing, that it would become organized, but perhaps maybe not organized in the way it had become last century. Oftentimes looking a little bit further than just hearing these stories that go around, that it was used, particularly the music of Wagner was used as a Germanic symbol, particularly during the time of Hitler. Look into the stories, and I can say perhaps the biggest cycle of music that he has is the Ring des Nibelungen, where he has the 4 operas, which are 24 hours worth of music, and it's all about stealing, really. And if one really truly, if you get away from this grandiloquent music, and get really into the story of things. Actually, my personal feeling is that the Nazis should not have liked the music at all.
Okay. Okay. And so, if I'm talking about opera, then I think on Aida.
Aida, yeah.
Yes. And what do you think? Can you compare the style of Aida and Waflas?
Verdi. Aida has been written by Verdi, and of course. Wagner, they were both contemporaries. They were both alive and well, and pretty much competing for the same territory as the best opera composer in the world during their times, and knew of each other. They were rivals to one another, and I think they had, the greatest respect for one another. Aida is, in and of itself, a very monumental work from from Verdi. I've sung the role any number of times. I've sung the opera any number of times in the roles of Ramfis and the King. But the Verdi operas are limited to an aria or a piece of music which begins and ends. And Wagner's interesting phenomena is that he generally, the opera which is most done by him, or that is most performed of his works, the Fliegende Holländer, is a number opera. That is, it begins a piece of, it's sort of like it's songs within an opera. And whereas when he starts with the Ring, he makes it very seamless, that it really begins and then it goes from one thing into another without coming to a stop at any one point during the opera. So he begins with the chord at the beginning, and 4 hours later he sort of ends. He naturally ends at the end of acts. But it goes from one thing into another. And so it's a different style of writing. But it's my opinion and the opinion of many singers, it's a very singable type of music.
Okay. Another question. In general, if you see people go to watch your moves or things when you are sing, yes. In general, they are all people. Can I say that?
The crowds in operas tend to be older. But also too that it's for a number of reasons. But also I must say that a big problem is that with the music programs in all of the schools around the world today, they're suffering. Arts are sold short. Our younger generations don't get enough of this. And
can you?
And this makes this makes the opera audience old in and of itself, because the younger people are not getting this culture, particularly in Western Europe. It is the culture of Western Europe, and in Germany it's tremendous. I mean, I have children in school, and they do not get enough art.
But are you trying to do something to get young people more to be interested in opera?
First, by being there. I think this is the most important thing. It was stressed in my education that I should get all the education that I should possibly attain. And you realize that it's getting as much as you possibly can. It never stops your learning. I think it's very important that time be felt. Politicians realize that it's very, very important that the culture, the art, the music, the visual and the sounding arts, as well as the philosophical arts, of course, these have to be brought to into your culture. They have to be carried by your governments, and that people learn of these things. Mostly it is because people don't want to come to the opera because they don't know what it is, and most of the time when they get there, they find out some of the shows are pretty funny. When they're tragic, they are still bringing out certain kinds of thoughts, and things come off of the stage. The live stage is its own thing. We're now in the era of electronic media, but the live stage still has its own magic.
Okay, so right now, more questions. There is more people who are gonna ask about it. So I like to hear. How do you sing? So can you sing about 1 second? Just
1 second. Whoa, jeez, that's very good. I
Yeah,
always love this. My repertoire comes running at me when I do something like this. I am a poor wayfaring stranger, a-traveling through this world of woe. But there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to where I go. Du sagst mir nichts.
Ein folgsam Kind, gefragt, nur spricht's.
Hi.
Hi,
And you're?
I'm Gina.
You're Gina, and you're?
I'm Lotte.
Lotte. Nice meeting you. You have a couple of questions for me.
Yeah.
Are you sure I can answer them?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think so.
good.
Are there special operas for children?
Yes, there are. Mostly if you take a very, very good look around. I'm sure here in Amsterdam, I can't promise this, but generally around the Christmas time, for instance, Hansel and Gretel are ones. It's one opera that I can think just off the top of my head. There are other children's opera. I have a friend who I did a recording with just a couple of years ago, who just wrote a new opera in Germany, and it had its premiere in Berlin this year. But there are operas for children. Many of the operas, particularly by Rossini, many of the Mozart operas are ideal children's operas as well.
And do you have children?
Yes, I have 3 children.
Yeah?
Yes.
And do they like opera?
2 of them do. And the other one's the youngest one. He's not old enough to know whether he really likes opera or not. He's only 4 years old.
How long are you singing opera?
I've been singing opera. This is my 28th year of singing. 28 years. How old are you? Don't tell.
Okay. Why do you think that children are not interested in opera?
Well, I think it's because it's what one hears. And if one doesn't hear it, then how can the interest even begin to build? For instance, I have a question for you. How much music do you have in a week in school?
1 time in a week.
1 time in a week. We used to have it 3 times a week when I was in school. That was just the regular general music that we studied, and then we also learned instruments as well in school. And plus we had choir in school. These were all, used to be all part of the everyday activities of schools. Not every school had this in the world, but I was fortunate, and in a great number of the states in the United States, they had this before. And I'm sure that there are people here in Holland that can tell you that there used to be more music, more art altogether in the schools.
Do you play instruments?
I used to play the French horn. That was the instrument I started on when I was 9 years old. And I played it for a good number of years, and in fact, I thought I would become an instrumentalist, that's to play in an orchestra or in a band. And I wanted to conduct I wanted to become a conductor of a symphonic band. That's sort of like when you say a symphonic band, there are no violins in this band. They're all blown instruments. But then it's somewhere along the line, I got taken by the business of singing, and here I am today.
How old do you start with singing?
That varies. Some people start very young, but mostly formal singing begins no earlier, I say. It's a personal thing that I have. No earlier than 15 or 16, and I say more ideally around 17, 18 years old. But singing is something we can do all the time, and I think that children should start even as early as they can walk by singing. I think it's a very important thing that we should do, and I think we should sing all of our lives too.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all the questions I want to ask.
I think I could answer those too. Thank
okay.
you.
Thank you very much.
Setz dich hier einmal noch auf die Bahn zu mir.
Wird's nicht zu kühl, es war heut gar schön.
Nicht doch, es ist mild und ladend, gar lieblich liegt mir an.
Hi, and your names are?
I'm Thijs.
Thijs?
I'm Neeltje.
Neeltje. Nice meeting you.
Well, okay. When was the first time you thought I want to be an opera singer?
I don't remember the real moment that it happened, but to try to make a not too long of a story, when I was a child, the radio was really what we used to mostly listen to, because television was just the new thing, and they didn't have that many stations, they didn't have that many programs, and the reception that we had on the television was not very good. And in fact, if you had a television like that today, you would say, "No, take this thing away. I don't need it." But on Saturday afternoons during the wintertime, the Metropolitan Opera used to broadcast live, and I'm from a little town in eastern Long Island, and it used to broadcast on the middle waves because before the FM waves, the better transmitting system came in. That was the way everything did, but it used to waver. And as the atmosphere would become lower, the stratosphere would become lower in the evening, or toward the evening, it would vary. And so you heard the opera a little bit in and out, but I liked it because it was unusual music. And you could hear the people in the audience, you could hear all of this going on. So this is where an interest started. Also with the school programs that we had. And I was always interested in music, with singing. And to me, I suppose I started with instrumental music, with playing the French horn. And it was more of a challenge because you have to master this instrument, this thing in your hand, you know. And to me, they said to sing or something, and things of this particular nature, because as it was something which was done in our family all the time, in church, at family gatherings, and to stand and sing a song, that was a pretty easy thing to do. I mean, I never thought very much about it. And until I then became further along, until I was really my next to the last year in high school, and I was singing in the choir, and the teacher came to me and says, you know, do you realize you've got a very good voice, and you should think about not just training it, but, you know, just think towards like the business of maybe becoming working towards becoming a singer. And at that suggestion, I did, and I was interested in singing more and more. So, but I was very distrusting because I didn't know how you could support yourself as a singer. And really, the secret is I don't even know today. But I then trained to be a teacher. Singing for a choral director is what I wanted to be at that time. And I went into a school where I could do a lot of performing, and one thing led to another, and I did my first opera not until I was 20 years old. And I was part of a student production, and I liked it a great deal. And then maybe that's, I think, where the idea really began to spark in my head. Yeah. Long question, sorry. Long answer, I should say.
But when I am 20, it's not my first thought, so I want to be an opera star. Why?
Well, I loved singing, and it's something that you just don't decide in a moment.
No,
I mean, I've always enjoyed music. It's been a very intricate part of my life all the time. And it's something that we as singers mostly don't recommend. And it's something, unless there's really a deep passion for wanting to do this sort of thing. Because it's a very hard business. It's hard to get yourself established. There are many people trying to do the same thing with very, very few opportunities or really at true success. So these things all have to be taken in consideration. So one has to be a little bit crazy helps, I think. No, not really.
Why are operas most of the times in German or Italian?
Well, they try to do them in the original language. There are, particularly here in Holland, where you can go hear operas in Dutch. You can do that. But naturally, when you're doing an international career and you're trying to go to different countries, now you have to learn the same opera in many different languages. And if they do something even better in the United States. They do the same opera in many different translations. So I've done the Marriage of Figaro, or the Figaro's Hochzeit, in at least 3 different English translations, and that makes it very, very difficult because it's hard to take from one to the other. But in the smaller theaters, oftentimes you will find that the operas are translated into the local language. So I've had my experience with doing Italian operas in the German language, but now I sing mostly on the international stages, and that means that the operas are sung in the original language.
Do you understand what you're singing?
It kind of helps to. If you don't, it's going to be pretty easy to get lost. I don't, in all cases, speak the languages that I sing in. Say when I go down to Italy, say for a week's vacation, at the end of a week, I'm speaking a lot more. But when you don't use that language every day, it's hard. It's very, very hard to keep them well oiled. I say. I, in fact, have studied more French than I have German, but it's pretty much left me. And when I go to France and I can read, and I spend a lot of time intensely reading, I can then get back into the language. But then you have to the audible language is so very different, particularly from region to region. And so it has its problem of keeping the language living.
Oh, in the James Bond movies, he always go to opera. Why?
Well, that's the nice thing to do. I mean, people normally get dressed up to go to an opera. It is a very, very special sort of thing. I have a question for you. Have you been to any live theater, like a musical? Have you been to or into plays on the stage. There is something about being in a theater, isn't there? That it's just more than words just being said. It's something which kind of comes off the stage when it's done well, and sort of kind of reaches out and touches you a little bit. And also too, with the Bond movies, it's always a prestige thing. I think it's always seen that one goes to the opera. He never really sits to the whole thing. Have you ever seen that? I don't think.
Do you have a sore throat after a performance?
No, but I feel like I've used my throat most of the time. If I have a sore throat, that means I probably have a cold, which has nothing to do with singing. And that's one of the great challenges. People ask all the time in the business, what is your singing technique? And I think it's more like, it's like you learn how to manage yourself vocally. And I think the biggest technique I always try to say is that it's trying to sing or getting through singing while I have a cold or I'm impaired by a lot of phlegm coming up or something like this. It's the biggest challenge for a singer, to stay healthy. And the type of life you lead you understand when I say it's a pretty sober life? You have to take care. You have to take care not to walk out in the rain and get all soaking wet, and try to observe to get to bed, eat a good diet. These things are very, very important, because if you're not healthy, then you can't start.
So you can't smoke or drink or anything?
A lot of singers do. I don't. A little drinking, I like beer,
Oh, yeah.
Holland has a very good beer. Very good beers, I should say.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite opera?
Not really. I mean, I say that I'm more true in love than I am to my trueness to any one composer in opera. I do like the operas of Verdi. I do like the operas of Wagner. I love doing Rossini operas. I like doing as much as possible. But yes, it does tend to be the more dramatic. The more dramatic roles, and that would be the more serious of the Verdi roles and the Wagner roles. But I'll only limit myself just so far.
When people ask, do you know an opera, they will almost always answer the Phantom of the Opera.
Why? Well, it's because that first of all, it was a very, very popular movie which came out, I think, in the 30s first, in the 1930s. And it's one which has then, of course, been repeated, and then, of course, then came to the live stage during the 70s. And it runs to the popular milieu. It's when you hear about something, you're apt to start to talk about it. And I think that this is perhaps a problem that opera has, that it is, as much as it's there for you, it's there for us all, it's not talked about as much.
Yeah, you're the only black person in your production now.
In my production, yes, there are. Although behind the scenes there are a good number of black people that also. In an opera company, by the way, of this particular size, I don't know the exact number, but I would estimate there are probably 600 to 700 people that take running a company like this. When you get all the publicity that has to be done, all the production work that has to be done, there's a great many more people that are involved than just the people you see on the stage. Although in the Meistersinger, it's kind of nice because of the grand scenes at the end of the second act and the third act, there are about 140 people on stage. So that's quite a few folks.
Yeah. But are they any black people?
Yes, there are. And there are, in fact, a good number of black people that sing opera. I have a good number of my colleagues, both male and female, that are from the United States. Particularly in years past, I don't know what the sheer numbers are. One spends a lot of time managing one's own career, and when you have a chance to be out and meet other singers, or you hear tales or hear spoken of others who are out in the business, well, then one is happy to hear about that. But it's a pretty lonesome business, because in between engagements there's a lot of time where you have to rehearsing. I teach myself, and but as far as there are a good number, naturally it is a small percentage of all those. I can't tell you. I would be telling you a lie to say if I knew exactly what kinds of numbers those really are.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, very much.
Thank you.
Elfenmann. Wenn Nürnberg die ganze Stadt mit Bürgern und Gemein, mit Zünften, Volk und Ruhe und Rat, und wir sind Zollverein. Das Hohen Preis, das Edler Neis, Teil ist das Gebot, dem Meister deiner Hand.
Mein Vater, muss es ein Meister sein?
Hör wohl, ein Meister deiner Wahl.
Ja, meine Wahl.
Sunlight, solar, red, red roses, and so you, it comes the heart, the sign of you are falling apart. More light, the things we notice, that's where it comes, and I'm so in love. I saw the sun, the sun, the moon, and mountains and the rivers. I saw heaven when I made sweet love to you.
Oh.
Oh my God.
I would not be able to sing that song without having heard the song before with you. And you are?
I'm Lisa.
Lisa and?
Alex.
Alex. Nice meeting you both. And you have some questions for me. First of all, what piece is that you just sang?
It's from a group called As Yet.
As Yet.
From the song Last Night.
Uh-huh.
It was a couple of years ago. It was a great hit around here.
Oh, okay. Very fine. And you have a couple of questions for me, do you?
Yes, my first question was, don't you ever grow tired of singing opera?
No, not at all. And a funny thing is you might think that, it's people oftentimes ask this question. It's the same opera written by the same composer, and the notes are always the same. And that's got to be boring. And my answer to that, but the situation is never the same. First of all, it's put together differently, or for each time it's done, it's put together in its own certain way by a stage director. And oddly enough, the repetition of doing the same opera comes not like what you might think. If I had said maybe done a production, for instance, is the Barber of Seville. I did a production of that. The first one I did was in 1993. The first time in my career, and I'd already sung for a number of years. It's a great role. Excuse me. It's a great bass role, which is in the opera. And it took me that long to first sing the opera. And the next time I sang it was 4 years later. So that's, it's a space of time. And the space of time I'm doing different things. And all those operas which are in my repertoire of operas, which are about now, I've actually sung roles in more than 60 operas. But the ones I really use, I've limited them down to really about 10 to 15 different operas, which I mostly sing. And you just don't repeat them that often. 4, 5, 6, 7 years in between is not unusual. So that's pretty hard to get tired when they don't come that often.
Yeah, true.
Okay. Is there a kind of music you absolutely hate?
There are types of modern music they are so far away from melody. Mm-hmm. They are so far away from any organization. What I recognize as true, something more of a traditional music as such. There are from some modern serious music composers. I find that these kinds of music have very little appeal to me, and also as much for the reason that I realize it's for very little public that is really interested in this kind of music. But say that I truly hate it, I won't go that far because I can generally get away from it. If it's not disturbing, if it's on the airways, I can just turn it off. And if it's in a concert hall, well, I know it's being performed, I don't have to go. So I don't have to go so far as to say that I hate it, but it's sort of hard to have an appreciation for some certain kinds of music. But particularly where you think that the sounds are just being thrown together, like walking on the street where everything happens is incidental. It just happens when it does. Then I say, what is the purpose in all of that? I'm a little bit of a romantic. I like things that are melodic and things you can sing fairly easily. And it also saves your voice. It's kind of nice to, yeah.
Okay.
You had some other questions for me.
True. From all the people you've worked with, is there anyone special of whom you say, oh, with that person I'd like to perform again, or absolutely not?
I can really, truly say there are groups of people. And it generally works down to artists who really know what they're doing, who are well prepared in their work, and are as much there for the work that they're doing, but also to enjoy what they're doing. And there's a large number of people that are in the business whom I enjoy working around, and I just can't really limit it just to any one person. I can say, when it comes to say enjoying, I had when I was coming up in my student years, with a teacher with whom I worked with. There were a number of my voice teachers that I worked with, but say putting together, we're talking more specifically about opera today. There was my professor that I worked with at the University of Michigan. His name was a man by the name of Josef Blatt. And he is originally from Vienna, but came to the United States many, many, many years ago, and had the reputation of being a pretty cranky man, but we got along really pretty fine. What he knew on music and about music, first of all, he sat down and played every opera and every rehearsal, never with a score of music in front of him. He knew every note. He knew every word. And the sheer sense of awe that a number, not just myself, but a number of people had, I would perhaps say that the experience of being around a person like this was the most impressive, and the type of thing where I oftentimes think back about him. He died this past year, in March of last year, at the age of 93 years old. So he lived a good long life. A nice, good long life. He did.
How many years of education in total, when it comes to the singing part, did you actually have?
It really added up to quite a number of years, because I knew from an early age, when I finished high school, I knew then that I wanted to go to study music further. There were no years in between where music was sort of a one-track thing. I got myself on a rail, and I just stayed with it the whole time. I think even from the first moment that I picked up a French horn, when I was a boy of 9 years old. But it started with when I'm in 18th year. My formal education ended when I was 28, and I then continued to study voice for a number of years beyond that. So we're talking about very intense vocal study as well as my general music study all together. We're talking about 15, 16 years. And then I also was teaching during that time. So I was in turn doing and putting to work with all what I had learned. And that still goes on today.
And my last question for now. From putting together everything you've learned and looking back at it, could you say now that, well, actually I should have learned more about this or more about that? Yeah.
One will always feel that way. I've tried to learn as much at all times as I possibly could, giving the proper emphasis to the things that were at hand. But oftentimes, the thing that I'm still learning operas all the time. I'm constantly learning new music. I'm constantly relearning, restudying old music for myself. And there's not enough time, say, for instance, to study enough Dutch that I can say, for instance, speak it as well as I would like to, for the way I'm treated in this country, or that for that interest. That also the same thing with French when I'm in France singing, or in Italy. But because I'm so involved then in the theater from morning till night, that those types of things, like with language, I don't learn enough. So, but I'm trying to get as much as I possibly can. But be rest assured that one of the things, particularly when I went to my higher education beyond my basic college studies, we were told you won't be able to learn it all, so just relax and don't worry about it. Try to get in as much as you can, but you won't be able to learn it all, so why worry about it?
That's a good one.
Yeah. Do you have another question for me?
No.
Okay.
Wohl, Meister, zur Tagesordnung kehrt und nicht von mir bericht, die ich auf Meisterpflicht einen jungen Ritter empfehle. Der will, dass man ihn wähle und heut als Meistersinger frei. Mein junger Stolzing kommt vorbei. Es gibt doch keinen Gast.
Oh, den Junker!
Wieso?
Saß dem euch nicht?
Was sei nicht froh, nicht doch. Was denn? Ei, werd ich dumm.
Jetzt Väterchen, komm, wie bleib ich dumm?
Was geht mir in Kopf? Doch
Hast
rot.
du's herauf, mit still und stumm sprach David, meint habe vertraut. Der Ritter, ach Gott, was fing ich an? Ach, gerne die Angst, große Feuer.